Okay, you just got a snippet of what we have had all morning long. Drew, you are on fire today.
I'm bouncing off walls.
You are bouncing off walls.
Out of control.
Not in a good way.
Since we went on the air at 4:30, you have had so much energy. It's insane.
Where did I stand while we were actually on TV broadcasting, though? Where was I? I was controlled.
All over the place.
You were in your spot.
Behind the scenes.
Okay, behind the scenes, a little bouncy. Len Bergstein joining us, our political analyst on this day after election night. And Len, I'm bouncing partly because I did stay up later than usual last night watching election coverage, and then I woke up earlier than usual this morning because we started a little earlier than usual. I'm running on very little sleep, but man, this election has kept me up because there are still so many things undecided right now. So what, for starters, was your big takeaway when you went to bed finally last night?
Well, I'm learning about parts of the country I never thought I'd really focus on. Map precincts in Michigan and Wisconsin and Nevada and so on and so forth. My takeaway is that the national race is so difficult to kind of turn your attention away from. Not only is this a kind of a down to the wire type of election, so that's got all of the dimensions of excitement and kind of thrilling nature of elections going to it, but also there's the drama of a president of the United States basically appearing in the White House saying, let's not count all the votes. Let's just stop the clock and stop the votes. I think the jarring image of the President of the United States making a case that, in fact, every vote should not, in fact, be counted is something that I think will stay with us long after the exact results are done. So we're all focused on a couple of states, and I think all of the news probably you're looking at and the viewers are looking at are still waiting for votes to be counted in places around collar areas around Detroit or areas in Wisconsin. So I don't know.
So as we record this, it's 7:06 in the morning.
Yeah.
And we reported during our sunrise show that Biden was up in Michigan by just 10,000 votes. I know watching last night and listening to some of the Democratic analysts, that was not the night that they wanted. Can you comment about some of the polls again that showed the Democrat candidate for president way up, and it's not materializing like that?
Yeah, this is not a good election for pollsters again. I mean, we had some mistakes in Oregon in terms of some of the ballot measures and some other things, but clearly at the national level, there's something really radically wrong about the way we do polling. And without getting into the weeds too much, polling depends on the sample that someone takes, which voters do they pick, and then how do they model those voters' performances. And those things are obviously changing literally as we watch. Different people are coming in to vote. Different people have different levels of intensity. So certain segments of the population show up that don't. Some segments of the population are tough to actually measure. Latinos are one group that I think are coming into a lot of attention this year. And then some people just outright lie to the pollster. They just have gotten so used to kind of like withholding information and not thinking that they have an obligation to tell the truth to a pollster, that in fact the pollster comes away with bad information, and that gets rippled through the system. So, but it's we used to be able to depend on those things or look to them as a signal as to what was going to happen, but obviously two presidential elections in a row that you can't trust those results.
Can I ask Len one real quick question about polling before we move on, Nina and Brenda? My simple question is this: after these last two election cycles, what's the point of polling? Is it just something we do because we're impatient and can't wait until election day itself? We need some immediate gratification. What's really the point of it?
Well, some of the operatives that work on campaigns say you really can't know how to spend money if you don't poll. I mean, there are clearly these larger pictures that we rely on have proven to be false, but really good campaigns. And let's take the Metro tax, transportation tax. Those campaign operatives who really understand how to go after the vote use the information they get to refine their message, to figure out which one's going to resonate, which is going to move polls, and then where to spend their resources in terms of the campaign. So if you've got really good polling kind of data and you really work on who you're testing in terms of what sample you think are going to come to the polls, polling is still an important tool to an operative in a campaign.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. Thank you, Len.
So as always, if you guys have any questions for Len, either national or Oregon or Washington measures or candidates, just type it into our live stream here on Facebook, or I'm watching you guys on YouTube. I don't know if we have the text line open quite yet this morning, but Len, I wanted to talk about Oregon made history, and it went along with the polls actually of what was supposed to happen. We are the first state to legalize magic mushrooms or psilocybin treatment. That's still kind of a long way down the road from actually happening. They've got to get that in development and taxes and all that. We also are the first state to decriminalize possession of some hard drugs. Is this kind of like putting Oregon on the map in some way for these things?
Well, it clearly will be areas where people around the country will take a look and say, "Wow, there they go again." I must say, I may be kind of revealing my own sense. It's not like the bottle bill or saving the beaches or something. It's clearly a very significant issue, both of those issues, and Oregonians performed the way they normally do. They look at a serious policy challenge and say, okay, are we unafraid to be bold and go where nobody else is going? And that's Portlanders and Oregonians like to do that. So clearly these were both bold steps in the direction that said what's working now is not, or what's in place now isn't working. And so we can't be afraid to change. And so I think that's the way you have to look at that in terms of the psilocybin measure and also the decrim. Also, it's a standard lesson in politics. One side on those two campaigns were very heavily financed. There was no opposition, so it played itself really out to form. And so the yes votes, unopposed, and with no campaign to confuse or kind of bring voters into a no vote, the yes vote won, and but it'll be a dramatic change in policies, including the decrim issue. You raised some internal Oregon questions amongst those people who are actively working in recovery as to whether or not this is a good idea to move the marijuana money over to this, to set up these addiction centers. Is it a kind of, the essence of reform, but no real delivery of reform? And that's what we'll be worrying about, those people who are really interested in those issues over the next couple of years.
Does it take all of the money from the marijuana tax that has been going to schools away, or do schools still get some of that tax revenue?
My understanding is it left the floor about $45 or something million that would still go to schools, and then the amount over that would go to the Oregon Health Authority to be distributed in a 90-10 formula, I think. The ballot measure actually laid out the formula as it should in an election like that. But there'll be some refinements at the legislature, and some fights over, in fact, the way the program is implemented.
Can we stick with the money talk for a second? Because there were some local money measures that passed, schools, parks, that type of thing. Yeah. What surprises you about that, or what does that say to you? Again, asking voters to approve a substantial amount of money during the pandemic, and some, times that you normally would not think that people would be spending. You would think that they would be tightening their belts.
You framed that exactly right, Brenda. I think the surprise to me was the number of money measures that were really on the heels of some very big money measures statewide. As you know, you've covered it pretty closely. The state implemented a commercial activity tax to try and fund schools at an adequate level, a big bite. The Portland metropolitan areas, the metro area folks voted in favor of a large measure to fund homeless services. There were several other measures that were leading up to this. So layered on top of that, it's really kind of like begun the debate of just, is our tax system working? We had an interesting discussion last night on the KGW kind of election night thing with Rukaya Adams, who was saying that it's time to revisit the question of the way our tax system is set up, so that in fact we don't pit schools against parks and all these other things. It's time to say, okay, what are the array of services we want, and how do we actually finance that with a tax system?
Len, I want to tap into your knowledge here and address one of our viewers, because the fifth voice, as we like to call it on Sunrise Extra, is the voice of the viewers. They're chiming in live with their comments. You can react live, Len, to this comment from Jennifer Neiman. Good morning, Jennifer. Thanks for watching us the day after election night. So she says, I am so disappointed and disgusted with the Measure 110 supporters. She says they've just simultaneously defunded education and treatment. She says we have to do something about purposefully misleading ballot initiative language. So she feels the ballot language was misleading. How would you respond to that, Len?
Well, she's tapped into something that you could read. She's exactly right in terms of her interpretation of this, and she reflects the debate that was going on in the voters pamphlet or whatever. There were several organizations that are very much involved in the day-to-day fight on recovery and addiction issues who were violently opposed to this and said it was out-of-staters who would kind of come in and were trying to impose their idea of how the system would work. So she's expressing something that was a very important debate that went on in the election, the ballot measure, but it just wasn't a prevailing. It didn't win. I mean, most voters looked at it and said, "No, what's working? What's going on now isn't working, and it's time to try something new." So, I'm sure she'll get a chance to kind of make that argument again to the legislature as they implement the program. I do want to go back to the tax thing, but Brenda, the question you asked during the campaign, speaking about polling, it looked like the library measure was going to go down, and I think that so they kind of like came in with a quick set of ads to get people back on the positive side about libraries. But I think the most significant measure was this one that was tuition-free preschool. I think people are going to be talking about that because it really ratchets up the income tax rates on. Granted, they're high-income folks, and you can't feel, I suppose, too sorry for people who are doing okay in these bad times. But in fact, it really dramatically moves up the income tax rates.
We now have the highest in the country for those single earners making over 125 and co-filers making over 500. It's higher than New York, higher than San Francisco, higher than LA.
Exactly.
That's pretty wild.
So that's the issue. The issue is, are we creating, in the name of kind of fully funding services or trying to get whatever tax tools we've got to fund those services that we think Oregonians or Portlanders want, are we creating an environment which is going to drive some middle income folks out of the city? That's different from the argument that businesses have made over and over again, that we have too high taxes and people are going to go across the river, move their business across. I think Oregonians believe that less, but they do say, gee, let's not create a San Francisco or a kind of model of living here where only the wealthiest can survive. In Portland, that's not the Portland I think we want. Although, again, this set of services resonated with people in the Portland metropolitan area. Clearly, it was an issue about kids, but it also was an issue about women in the workforce. And so the subject matter deserved the kind of attention it got. Whether or not the taxing mechanism was the right one, or do we have enough tools in our toolbox to kind of like provide for the money for those services, is the question that's in front of us now.
What do you think about the Portland City Council? Mingus Mapps running the very first campaign of his career and ousting Chloe Eudaly, who 4 years ago basically defeated Steve Novick, and that was her first big upset, and now she's out after one term. This is going to be the most diverse Portland City Council in history. What do you envision moving forward with that group of leaders?
I don't want to be too glib about this, but I talked about the fact that this is very much like the bar scene in Star Wars. It's a very you're going to walk in the city hall and see a very different thing. And somebody else said a pretty clever remark, said, "No, it's like the red wedding scene in Game of Thrones, because the people they're not used to working with each other, and you may be walking into a kind of a slaughter if you're looking for 3 votes." The key point here, I think, is that Portland voters were looking for change. Every poll, even the ones you may trust or not trust, was saying that we were unsatisfied with where we are, and we were going in the wrong track. So voters, I think, were looking for a change. That set it up so that the incumbents were at a disadvantage. The voters in the mayor's race decided to not accept the alternative, so that they were looking for change, and they expressed that in the MAPS Udaley race. And he did a nice job of taking advantage of the discontent out there. She had a tough time defining what her first term was like, much like Steve Novick had a tough time defining, what he had done during that first term. And the voters have a way of penalizing an incumbent if they can't kind of like say exactly what they've done to deserve being reelected. And I think that's what that was there. Clearly, I want to take the line that I think Willamette Week used about Chloe and kind of add it in here. She gets things done. I mean, she went to the city council to do stuff for renters and underrepresented folks, and was dogged in her determination to get it done. But what Willamette Week also said was sometimes she's her own worst enemy. And the way she did it took on some forces in the city of Portland that made it possible for Mingus Mapps to find a very ready constituency for change.
I was laughing at the beginning of that answer, Len, because you made the Star Wars music reference, the bar scene. Maybe when we're talking about our local election results the next few days, we should have that bar scene music playing underneath from the Star Wars bar scene. But I do want to make this about our viewers. It's Sunrise Extra is for the viewers, of the viewers, by the viewers. Viewer Katie Abigail Bassett says, I knew the country was split, but I had no idea just how close this election overall would be. She says just a few thousand votes separating Trump and Biden in so many different states, right? The nearness of a 50-50 split is shocking to her, she says. She says, I just didn't expect it to be this close. I do think we all expected it to be close, right? I mean, was it surprising to you just how close it came in many states?
Oh, yes, I think, and people are going to be talking about this for a long time, Joe. I think obviously the dominant nature of the polarity in the country is the most dominating characteristic of politics right now, and you can see it in state after state after state, and it's something we got to fix. I mean, the idea you could see that there was some resonant kind of political campaign language that said, no, we've got to work to bridge these gaps. Clearly, Biden found that as a very positive message, and I think it helped him buoyed his campaign along. But your viewer is 100% right. We are an extremely divided country, and what's worse, obviously, and I'm revealing again my feelings about current president, is that when you have a politician that kind of uses that to divide further for their own purposes, that's really when the system is really in bad shape. Now let's just take this to a local level. Clearly, and we haven't talked about this much, what happened in Oregon state legislative races was very interesting. The entire coast flipped to the Republican side. Now the Democrats are still in charge of the Oregon Senate, and they're still in charge of the Oregon House, but there now are no the Democrats lost a couple races on the South Coast and the North Coast, and the way they lost was by a candidate appealing to the fact that you don't want us to turn out like Portland, and there were these very divisive kind of images of a street scene in street violence in Portland. So we have it. Oregonians like to kind of look at the rest of the country and say that couldn't happen here, but it could happen here. Yeah. So our politicians have got to make a real effort to kind of find what unites us in order to kind of come out of this 2020 and kind of get the job done we need to get done on pandemic, on wildfires, on our economic recovery, on the social justice and racial justice movement. I mean, you and your viewer there have put their finger on, I think, the dominant challenge that any Oregon politician has got to kind of like try and bring us together to solve these very knotty problems.
I wanted to end on Clark County area and that hotly contested race that we've now seen for years, 2 times around, with Jamie Herrera Butler as the incumbent Republican and Carolyn Long. It is still officially too close to call. Butler has, the slight edge. That would be pretty huge if somehow it were to go Carolyn Long's way to flip that seat to Democrat, right?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And we saw in that race, unlike a lot of the congressional races in Oregon. I mean, we were focused a little bit on the DeFazio race in that terms where a challenger came in.
And he
I think
won.
Long was hoping not to kind of like hit a, kind of a trifecta. She needed to have a really good campaign like she did. She needed to take advantage of the demographic changes that are going on in the district, which you guys have talked about a lot. And then she had to hope for a blue wave. And the blue wave part of it just didn't quite come in the same way that people were expecting. So she may have fallen a little bit short. Although it shows you that you got to be, if you're running for Congress, you got to be in it for a couple of elections in order to really have a chance. And that's a message, I think, probably for Republicans in the 4th congressional district, where this guy Skarlatis, I mean, he's either a one and done kind of a guy, or he needs to come back again and try that one more time. And that'll be an interesting thing. We talked about that with Rebecca Tweed last night on the panel, and I think the Republicans are struggling to try and find somebody who will run a kind of repetitive race to try and win. But yeah, that long race was very interesting, and she's got a very compelling. Herrera Butler's got a very compelling human story, her own personal narrative.
Okay, Lynn, I want you to leave me and the rest of those watching on the stream with one thing that you're hopeful for. I feel like whatever political persuasion people are, we need a little hope. We need a little positivity. Send us off with that. Do you got anything?
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? I think the clear message is that votes do matter. I mean, every vote matters. So if you're a voter out there watching TV, you can't look at this election and say, gee, my vote doesn't matter. I can sit this one out. It matters in terms of close turnouts. It matters when, votes are really the issue. How you vote, when you vote, whether your vote is going to be suppressed or not, or whether or not it's going to be counted. Voting franchise, the thing that our democracy is really kind of like based on, was at issue front and center. So the message, I think, Brenda, is that every one of the voters out there have got to say, it is your obligation. It's the way you get change. You have to vote.
Let's hope it's the last one that's all discombobulated like this. Len Bergstein, a KGW political analyst, thank you so much for sticking with us all throughout yesterday and last night and this morning. You can check the latest results at KGW.com. Have a great day.